Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, I don't know what the hell it is. It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday, November 17th, 2020. Yes, now I remember. And last night, noting to myself, for no particular reason, because I'm looking for things to give myself to look forward to. It is a mere 4 months to St. Patrick's Day. I know everybody is counting down the days. St. Patrick himself probably counting down the days, counting snakes, counting days, all the things that a good saint should, I suppose. I don't know. I got no advice for saints. Anyway, it's the 17th. Actually, I mean, St. Patrick's Day is quite a marker for us. I'll bet you last St. Patrick's Day, you thought that this next St. Patrick's Day, we'd definitely be having a parade. But I think that we might not. We'll see what the winter brings us. But by all indications, the outlook isn't that good. The winter is coming. Oh, boy. I guess we get to use that phrase and drag that out, dust it off, and use it again. And again, all the leading indicators are that the lagging indicators, the one we worry about, death, should be making a big comeback during the winter. We could put a positive spin on it. Hey, it'll be record-breaking. Yeah, okay. Trump will still be around for part of it, and then he'll be tweeting from outside the government, and it'll be really interesting. I suppose we should all be prepared at this point for his spending, I guess, the very late part of January after he's out of office, and February, and maybe some of March, maybe St. Patrick's Day, tweeting his complaints about how the Biden administration is responsible for all of this somehow. And it's all their fault, and I thought that they had some sort of miracle cure. Of course, he was the one with the miracle cure to sell us or to buy for us using federal dollars and then, I guess, never distribute to us. Just as a quick reminder, I can let everybody know I track this each evening when the Worldometers folks are finished doing their tabulation. Where do we stand on this? Since Trump exited the hospital and then made his video allegedly on the White House lawn promising every vulnerable senior in America the instant miracle cure that made him feel great and made him sure that he could leave the hospital within hours. But he humored his doctors and waited another day just to show them how awesome he was for having received this fantastic treatment. But he told everybody it's wonderful, it's like a miracle, and that's why I'm going to distribute it free to every vulnerable senior in America. And we're going to get started right away. I am going to immediately sign an order that will make it available. Of course, one, we don't know whether he signed anything. You can never tell with Trump paperwork. But at best, what he was talking about was paperwork that he wouldn't be signing anyway, an emergency use authorization for the monoclonal, I can't even remember the name of the whole treatment. I'm not a doctor. I don't remember these things. They're fleeting from moment to moment. I'm too busy thinking about the two vaccines that are competing for our attention in the news. But you remember what was it, I can't even remember. I'm not going to bring it to mind anyway. But you remember the miracle treatment that he got. And by all accounts, it was a fairly effective treatment and might be a good idea, perhaps, to get out the door. And they may yet do it. But as I was saying, there's nothing for him to sign in an emergency use authorization. What word am I trying to get at? I keep making this mistake. And I think Greg does too. It probably drives us crazy. Anyway. Point is, it has now been since October 8th, it's now November 17th, it's a month and a half since he said it was going to immediately be moving out to all the vulnerable seniors in America, and just tracking things since, including October 8th, when he made the video, 35,455 people in the United States have died of coronavirus, waiting for this immediate miracle cure to be delivered to them. And 3.7 million more people have contracted the coronavirus and tested positive since then as well. That just also gives you an indication of how swiftly this thing is moving, and our testing still isn't keeping up with it. But so a month and a half ago, 3.7 million additional people who have caught the virus, and deaths unfortunately set to accelerate as well. I've seen all the charts being distributed and read all of the same things you have about how hospitals are at capacity in many of the states particularly across the upper Midwest, and death and serious illness being lagging indicators, of course. A lot of people reminding us that if hospitals are out of capacity now, and the governors are panicking about that now and asking people to make changes now, masking mandates finally in a lot of these states that have been resisting it because that's what Republican cool kids did to make the mercurial moron, idiot, jackass, murderer president happy. Why they continue to worry about making him happy, I have no idea. The lamest lame duck you ever saw, but there it is. And now I guess they're getting around to it and saying, all right, we got to do something about it. But of course, everybody who's going to push us over the top on hospital capacity is already sick and headed to the hospital. There's nothing we can do about that. It's never too late to tell people to put masks on, I guess. It'll prevent things from getting that much worse later on. But we are reminded that everybody who is going to be entering the hospital in the next couple of days got sick 2 weeks ago or whatever, and there's no preventing that. So I guess we're in for it, and now we wait and watch and, bite our tongues as we watch the people who insisted that there was no danger and that it was all a hoax or it was all overblown or what have you, enter the hospital. And then I guess, according to that one nurse who made herself internet famous by telling us what was actually going on in hospitals, we'll be hearing more from the coronavirus denialists who insist that they're dying of something else. Apparently, I watched the interview with her on CNN, a little bit of it yesterday, and I guess apparently they insist they're dying. Maybe it's lung cancer, they say, or maybe I have pneumonia or something else. They want it to be something else. I don't know why, but it's just a coping mechanism, I guess. And also, by the way, she was clear that it's not all of her patients are like that. There are many people, and I imagine probably most of them still out there are pretty clear on what's doing it and why it's happening and tried hard to prevent it. But the vocal few who are busy with the task of dying of coronavirus in the hospital, insisting on this. I thought the saddest part of it was that she commented that people who should be, gathering their thoughts about their last days, their last moments on Earth, and that should be, FaceTiming with their family to connect with people, to say their goodbyes if necessary, are instead dying alone, fuming and furious about something else that isn't killing them and angry at the people who are trying to help them. And it's a hell of a waste of life. And Donald Trump, Fox News, the rest of them, and now his new news sources, fake news sources like OANN and God knows who else, but Newsmax, all of you responsible for this. Donald Trump is killing you, and you're letting him do it. Anyway, that's not news. Okay, so let's see. I think the big news of the morning, mentioned in Bill's morning tweet, that's how I know it's big news. Lindsey Graham should be arrested and sent to Guantanamo or something like that. You can send him somewhere else. It's all right. But apparently, Lindsey Graham, big-time criminal, or at least that's what Republicans like Lindsey Graham would say about him and what he did if he were a Democrat. News is that he has been pestering, that would be a great way of putting it, like in favorable light, pestering the Secretary of State down in Georgia, who's involved in placating the Trump morons with a sort of recount and audit of the vote to show that, yeah, we got everything right after all. And not every single thing. Apparently, there was brief cause for celebration among the Trump ranks yesterday. I guess one of the counties found some additional votes that they hadn't tabulated before, and the president gained that Trump guy. We refrained from calling him the president for 4 years. But now that he's a lame duck, I like calling him the president, I guess. They found some votes for him and, slightly narrowed the margin. I think they might have narrowed the margin by even as much as 800 votes. But, of course, Biden still stands at close to 14,000 votes ahead in Georgia, as I recall from the last read of the situation. And, it made a tiny dent, but didn't change anything in terms of the likelihood that when all was said and done, Biden would still have won Georgia. And I suppose I can't decide whether it is helpful or not to stretch this out into the runoffs for the Senate. If we're continually talking about Trump struggling to find a way to win in Georgia and for his candidates to win in Georgia, but the reality is day after day, Georgia's blue, and that's the way it is. Well, I don't know. I can't tell. Of course, if it was really solidly blue, then there would be no runoff here. So there's always the danger that Republicans are motivated to come out to somehow salvage Georgia for the president. And if they can't change the presidential vote totals, they can still change the Senate vote totals. And I think that's the dominant conventional wisdom on things. But, Georgia's been all about turning the conventional wisdom upside down. So there's still hope, and everybody's pushing real hard. Another great storyline, of course, being pursued. People making sure that everybody that will listen, anyway, knows how far afield Kelly Loeffler and even David Perdue apparently went in trying to profit off of the insider information they were being given about this fake coronavirus that's killing everybody in upper Northwest or Midwest, so that they could run out and make a killing in the stock market, which I guess is just what Loeffler does as a lifestyle. Why they felt the need to pocket an extra million or two when they're sitting on, several million as it is, tens of millions. I believe she may actually be the wealthiest senator at the moment, despite the fact that she was not an elected senator. That doesn't matter when you're just measuring the wealth. And they just felt like maybe another couple $1 million would be a fun thing to have, even if it meant impoverishing the rest of you or standing in the way of coronavirus relief for the rest of you. And that ought not to be the kind of person you want for that job. But tough nut to crack, I guess, down in Georgia. Anyway, speaking of trying to change things in Georgia, again, where were we? Do I have my... It's buried under 10 other stories. Let me grab the Washington Post piece. I just watched the story unfold yesterday in amazement, and then as it was all rolling by, it suddenly hit me at about 11:30 or so. I haven't put any of these stories away. Lindsey Graham, who, as you know, is from South Carolina, has been active on the phone calling the Secretary of State in Georgia, which those of you listening from outside the United States, it's another state. It's a totally different state. Lindsey Graham should have no pull in Georgia. They are neighboring states. There is that. But being a senator from South Carolina ought not to give you any particular power over the Secretary of State in Georgia, other than, well, he's a famous big-time Republican, and I guess he could cause problems for Georgia's appropriations in Congress if we were to displease him. But it would be an awfully difficult sell inside the Senate Republican Conference for the senator from South Carolina, Republican though he is, to override the will of the two current Republican incumbent senators from Georgia with respect to appropriations for Georgia. It would be a tall order and tough to get Mitch McConnell and others to agree to do Lindsey Graham's bidding in all of this, especially as they're trying to do everything they can to boost the chances of the two Republican senators from Georgia in seeking re-election. But whatever, Lindsey Graham got in his head that Brad Raffensperger, who apparently owes his job, interestingly enough, to Brian Kemp, the governor there. I guess, is that not an elected position? Did he get appointed to that position? I keep seeing him being referred to as hand-picked Secretary of State, hand-picked by Brian Kemp, the governor, who I think held that position prior to being elected governor. That doesn't necessarily mean it isn't an elected spot. You could be the hand-picked candidate. I don't know. But some states elect their secretaries of state. Others have them appointed by the governors. The story is here. Amy Gardner reporting it for the Washington Post. Georgia's Secretary of State says fellow Republicans, not just Lindsey Graham, are pressuring him to find ways to exclude ballots. That's the actual story. I finally spit it out here. They are trying to, I guess the best possible spin you could put on it is, and I think the one Lindsey Graham is putting on it, is they're simply trying to help him understand the powers that the Secretary of State actually has in determining which votes will and won't be counted. And if you were inclined to see things this way, perhaps you might exclude these ballots. And we know about ways to exclude ballots in your state and in other states. And did you think of this? Is essentially, I think that's what Lindsey Graham would say. That's all I'm asking. But I guess he didn't see it that way. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said Monday that he has come under increasing pressure in recent days from fellow Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, who he said questioned the validity of legally cast absentee ballots in an effort to reverse President Trump's narrow loss in the state. What the senator from South Carolina would know about ballots that are in question in Georgia would probably be, should be nothing more than you and I could read in the newspaper about it, but perhaps there are insiders in Georgia sharing that information with people who have otherwise no business knowing about it, although it wouldn't be a crime necessarily to share that information, depending on what it was. In a wide-ranging interview about the election, Raffensperger expressed exasperation over a string of baseless allegations coming from Trump and his allies about the integrity of the Georgia results, including claims that Dominion Voting Systems, the Colorado-based manufacturer of Georgia's voting machines, is a, quote, leftist company with ties to Venezuela that engineered thousands of Trump votes to be left out of the count. It does sound a little far-fetched, doesn't it? But hey, anything could happen. The atmosphere has grown so contentious, Raffensperger said, that he and his wife, Tricia, have received death threats in recent days, including a text to him that read, "You better not botch this recount. Your life depends on it." That's pretty straightforward. Other than you getting angry, or getting you angry, it's also very disillusioning, Raffensperger said, of the threats, particularly when it comes from people on my side of the aisle. And there's no aisle, by the way, in the Secretary of State's office. It just, whatever. It's a turn of phrase. Everyone that is working on this needs to elevate their speech. We need to be thoughtful and careful about what we say. He said he reported the threats to state authorities. The pressure on Raffensperger, who has bucked his party in defending the state's voting process, comes as Georgia is in the midst of a laborious hand recount of about 5 million ballots. President-elect Joe Biden has a 14,000 vote lead in the initial count. The normally mild-mannered Raffensperger saved his harshest language for Representative Douglas A. Collins, a Republican, you wouldn't believe it, huh? Republican of Georgia, who is leading the president's efforts in Georgia, and whom Raffensperger calls a liar and a charlatan. Yikes. Collins has questioned Raffensperger's handling of the vote and accused him of capitulating to Democrats by not backing allegations of voter fraud more strongly. Wasn't Collins the one who was running against Loeffler? Is that right? In that one being a special election, and everybody was in sort of the same initial well, you know how they do it in Georgia? I was surprised by this, to find that this was the case in Georgia. I've seen it in other states. But everybody of both parties was running. And basically, if no one person got over 50%, the top two vote getters would be in the runoff, even if they were from the same party. But Collins, I think, was looking to unseat Loeffler that way, and it didn't work. But I guess it's because of all the fraud. Raffensperger has said that every accusation of fraud will be thoroughly investigated. That ought to keep him busy. but that there is currently no credible evidence that fraud occurred on a broad enough scale to affect the outcome of the election. Anyway, the recount, Raffensperger said in the interview on Monday, will affirm the results of the initial count. He said the hand-counted audit that began last week will also prove the accuracy of the Dominion machines. Some counties have already reported that their hand recounts exactly matched the machine tallies previously reported. Election officials in one county, Floyd, discovered about 2,600 eligible votes that were not included in the initial tallies because of a failure to upload them off of a memory stick. That's kind of an annoying source of error. I mean, if you have the physical ballots, it seems a lot harder to ignore a stack of 2,600 ballots that have to be put into the machine as opposed to storing the results on a memory stick. And did I get every one of those files off of there or not? Anyway, the Secretary of State's office said those votes probably would have been discovered eventually, but it called for the resignation of the county election director anyway. And sure, why not at this point? But I did see some video circulating on the internet about county officials sort of high-fiving one another when they discovered that, hey, our hand recount matched the numbers we had initially from the machines. Exactly. We're doing a good job. They were happy with themselves. All right, Raffensperger continues here. I'm an engineer. We look at numbers. We look at hard data. I can't help it that a failed candidate like Collins is running around lying to everyone. He's a liar. Wow. A spokeswoman for Collins replied to a request for comment by linking to a tweet Collins sent on Monday in which he described Raffensperger's incompetence as Secretary of State. Collins ran unsuccessfully for Senate this year and is blamed by some Republicans for pushing the incumbent in that race, fellow Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, into a runoff against the Reverend Raphael Warnock. Yay, a Democrat. Everyone, of course, should be sending a couple bucks that way to try and make that election work. In the interview, Raffensperger also said he spoke on Friday to Graham, who's the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who has echoed Trump's unfounded claims about voting irregularities. In their conversation, Graham questioned Raffensperger about the state signature matching law and whether political bias could have prompted poll workers to accept ballots with non-matching signatures, according to Raffensperger. Graham also asked whether Raffensperger had the power to toss all mail ballots in counties found to have higher rates of non-matching signatures, Raffensperger said. And so pushing, I guess, for him to just jump to the conclusion that, well, if some of these counties, i.e. ones that voted very heavily for Biden over Trump, have higher rates of non-matching or purportedly non-matching anyway, signatures on the ones on the mailed-in ballots and the signatures that they might have on file when you first register to vote. Well then, if there are a couple of mistakes or enough of them, couldn't you say, well, it's enough to create doubt about all of the mail-in ballots and throw them all out, which is an enormous leap to make, and I guess something that, if it should be attempted at all, should certainly involve some outside review from a judge or something like that. But he wants Raffensperger. Couldn't you just make that decision all by yourself and then let a judge decide whether or not it was a good decision? Is basically what he's asking for. And by the way, I saw a lot of people, and why not at this point, questioning, hey, if that's the sort of thing that Lindsey Graham feels comfortable calling the Secretary of State of Georgia, a completely different state, and asking him to do we know that he didn't call the Secretary of State, if that's how they decide these things, in South Carolina and ask the same thing? Maybe one or two of these ballots in this county, the signatures didn't quite match. Maybe you should throw out all those ballots. Were any of Jamie Harrison's ballots thrown out at the urging of Lindsey Graham? We must have an investigation in Ballot Ghazi and figure out how many of these things. Who gave the stand-down order to the Secretary of State in South Carolina? I demand to know, if there was one, and whether it would have made any difference, notwithstanding. All right, well, let's see. Raffensperger, quite believably enough, said he was stunned that Graham appeared to suggest that he find a way to toss legally cast ballots. Absent court intervention, Raffensperger doesn't have the power to do what Graham suggested because counties administer elections in Georgia and probably everywhere. But, again, what Graham is asking for is, well, couldn't you just do the thing and let the court tell you not to if they can't be persuaded that my idea is an awesome one? That's the way Republicans like Graham and Trump operate. Do it and let the courts stop you if they think they can. Anyway, it sure looked like he was wanting to go down that road, Raffensperger said. In an interview on Capitol Hill on Monday evening, Graham denied that he had suggested Raffensperger toss legal ballots, calling that characterization, quote, ridiculous, because, of course, he would tell you, well, I was suggesting that he toss illegal ballots, not legal ballots. They would be illegal because the signatures didn't match. And the ones that did match, but were from counties where there were a lot of ones that didn't match, they wouldn't be legal either once the Secretary of State said, we're throwing them all out. So those, he's playing a semantic game here. But he did say that he did seek out the Secretary of State to understand the state's signature matching requirements. Graham said he contacted Raffensperger on his own and was not asked to do so by Trump. The main issue for me is, how do you protect the integrity of mail-in voting, and how does signature verification work? He said he was just curious, generally speaking, about how signature matching works because, in South Carolina, no one can write, I guess, and they don't have signature matching. I don't know. Maybe they don't. I'm just so curious about how you do it down there in Georgia. Well, anyway, if he feels threatened by that conversation, he's got a problem, Graham added. I actually thought it was a good conversation. On that same day that Graham spoke to Raffensperger about signature matching, a lawsuit was filed in federal court in Georgia challenging the way county election officials check signatures and allow voters a chance to fix ballots with errors. So a bit of a coordinated effort, it would seem. All right, we'll be right back after this 2-minute break and move on to the next atrocities from here. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Ed Roots Radio. All right, we can wrap up this article. There is a little bit more, and I guess it's worth noting what Trump was tweeting about the situation. Let's see. So Graham denies that he did anything wrong, and it was all good, and I just was calling to learn about signature matching, that's all. And, in coordinated action, a lawsuit filed in federal court in Georgia challenging all of this. The suit filed by Atlanta lawyer and Trump supporter Lynn Wood, L-I-N, Lynn Wood, who I understand from a prior article on the subject was, I guess, Richard Jewell's lawyer. Is that right? Way back when. I know it doesn't mean anything in particular, but some note in case you had ever, maybe you've heard the name before. Anyway, Lynn Wood's suit seeks to block certification of Georgia's election until all ballot envelopes are inspected. And, one of many lawsuits filed all over the place to try to block certification of the vote, which, in turn throws, potentially could throw the Electoral College into disarray, or for that matter, continue to give the General Services Administrator the opportunity to continue refusing to release transition funds, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, same day, Trump also tweeted about signature matching in Georgia and criticized Raffensperger for his management of state elections. The tweet actually read, Georgia Secretary of State, a so-called Republican, and then parenthetically Rhino, Republican in name only, won't let the people checking the ballots see the signatures for fraud. Why? Without this, the whole process is very unfair and close to meaningless. Everyone knows that we won the state. Completely wrong, top to bottom, of course. And the Georgia Secretary of State responded on Twitter, I saw, saying there's nothing about, there's no truth to the idea that people checking the ballots for signature matching aren't allowed to see the signatures. Of course they are. And I did see also circulating on Twitter the AP's report yesterday, just basically that Trump's description of the process was essentially imaginary. It just didn't bear any relationship to the way Georgia's elections workers were actually handling not only the initial count, but the recount. And he was just making it up because he knew that if he said that they weren't allowed to look at the signatures, many people would believe it and they'd get all agitated and be on his side. Others, though, would think he's an idiot and continue thinking he's an idiot, and they'd be right. Yeah, everyone knows we won the state. You lost the state. And this has been another episode of how to interpret or how to read a Trump comment. Raffensperger said he will vigorously fight the lawsuit, which would require the matching of ballot envelopes with ballots, potentially exposing individual voters' choices. That's an interesting angle on it, too. I guess if Trump were to have his way, I mean, this is an ancillary issue for Trump. I'm sure he's perfectly happy to do things this way. This doesn't bother him at all. But in order to have what he might consider, although even if he got it, he would and still lost, he would still say this isn't 100% transparency. What he's saying is everybody in America, the public, should have the right to inspect all of these things right along with the elections workers, and we should be able to see the name of the person who cast this ballot and what their signature looks like, and it's on file, and what the signature on their envelope looked like, and then who did they vote for, and was it fraud? And so, essentially, he's asking for a list of everybody who mailed in a ballot in Georgia to be printed up and shown to everybody. Who voted for who in Georgia? And, of course, that's a huge violation of our right to the secret ballot. But, I'm not sure how Brett Kavanaugh feels about that. He likes beer, and privacy might not be a big deal for him. Who knows? Anyway, as Raffensperger says here, it doesn't matter which political party or which campaign does that. The secrecy of the vote is sacred. The Secretary of State also warned that the Republican attacks on Dominion voting machines could create issues for the state's Republican U.S. Senators, Loeffler and Perdue, who face runoffs on January 5th that will be administered using the same Dominion machines, those ones that notoriously got it all correct after they were checked by hand. Over the weekend, social media posts began appearing from Trump supporters questioning whether they feel comfortable using Dominion machines in the two runoff elections, which will determine which party controls the Senate. I don't think it's helpful when you create doubt in the election process, Raffensperger said. People might throw up their arms and say, why vote? I encourage you to do so if you're a Republican and you're worried about these things. I don't know about throwing up on your arms, but that seems like too much to do, and really, honestly, a little bit of a mess, but that's what the guy said. He, of course, didn't say it quite that way, but words matter, and so therefore we're going to distort his words, because, as much of a big hero as he is here, why, I'll bet he's got some nefarious past that we could dig up on him, because of course, you don't get to be appointed by a jackass like Brian Kemp for nothing. But I'm glad he's doing his job, or appearing to do his job anyway, in this instance. There's more news to share on the lawsuit front, on the congressional front. How about this one? Let's throw this in here just to follow up on a story we touched on and really should have spent more time on because it was a big outrage. But our big idiot, president made it impossible to focus on anything but his fundamental threats to our right to vote and to American democracy. So it was a big deal. We had to look away. But you remember I mentioned what was going on in Portsmouth, Virginia, where a local elected official, and as I recall, one of the more powerful and senior state senators in Virginia, found herself in the crosshairs of the local constabulary, the local cops picked her up and arrested her for vandalism, I guess inciting vandalism, during one of the very many Black Lives Matter protests across the country during the summer, and particularly some of those that were focused or ended up being focused around a local Confederate monument. And she apparently put herself out there by way of protecting the First Amendment rights of the protesters and warning police off from arresting peaceful protesters just because they chose to gather there within sight of this Confederate monument. And that got the police ticked off and other local officials ticked off. And there's been a lot of pushback from both sides on this issue. But essentially where we left it was the local cops were just being outrageous in persecuting her there. And then the local prosecutors, and if I remember again correctly, were they related? Were they from the same family? The state senator, and I guess her daughter was one of the local officials as well, saying, I'm here keeping an eye on this. You better watch your step, and we're not going to prosecute this ridiculous case. And battle lines were drawn, to say the least. Anyway, it's not a very good summary that I've given here. I'd really have to check back and reread the stories to refresh my memory of what happened. Or we'll see whether they refresh our memory here in this NBC News article entitled, encouragingly enough, Virginia Police Chief Fired as Felony Charges Are Dropped in Confederate Vandalism Case. Portsmouth Police Chief Angela Green was fired as felony charges were dismissed against Senator Louise Lucas, Virginia's most senior black legislator, and 18 others. Interesting. And the video is here, along with the caption of fired Virginia police chief says, "I did nothing wrong." And I don't know whether the police chief was driving this as much as you might ordinarily think, or whether other local politicians were pressuring the chief to do this. But let's see what Eric Ortiz has to say at NBC. The police chief of Portsmouth, Virginia, was fired Monday in what she suggested was a politically motivated move moments before criminal charges were dropped against a prominent state senator and several local black leaders accused of conspiring to damage a Confederate statue during a protest this year. The latest twist in the case involving State Senator Louise Lucas, a high-ranking Democrat who is Virginia's most senior black legislator, drew praise from Democrats who condemned the charges. I guess one of the comments containing the praise comes from this embedded tweet. Jay Jones, who actually tweets as Jones J, like Heat G or G or Heat, I guess. But anyway, this Jay Jones here, who is, I don't know, let me open up his Twitter bio and let's say, Democratic candidate, how could I not know this, for Attorney General of Virginia, and currently a delegate for Virginia's 89th district. Not my neighborhood, so I'm not as familiar with him, but I guess I should starting to become familiar anyway with Attorney General candidates. Anyway, he says, absolutely the right call. Senator Louise Lucas is a warrior for justice, and this situation serves as a reminder of the systemic ills we're working to combat every day. An empowered civil rights division in the AG's office would stamp out these baseless claims. So I guess that's what he aims at in his election. A bravo here for Don Scott 757, who's, let's go see. Don Scott, also a delegate representing the 80th district in Virginia. And I don't know. I don't know all the players in the game here, but at any rate, maybe it was he who dismissed the charges against Senator Lucas. Former Governor Terry McAuliffe tweeted, "Our hero Louise Lucas and her fellow proud Portsmouth citizens deserve our admiration. Grateful this despicable political persecution is over." Lucas's office could not immediately be reached for comment. The Virginian Pilot of Norfolk, the newspaper down there, reported that she said dismissal of the case gives people hope. that when they come to these courtrooms, they will be treated in a fair and just manner, even though you may have a rogue police department who intends to criminalize the justice system against people like me. Well, it is a criminal justice system, but we get your point. The Portsmouth Police Department did not immediately return a request for comment, and a city spokeswoman declined to say whether Green's firing was a result of the initial charges. Portsmouth police in August charged Lucas and 18 other plaintiffs in this new lawsuit, including a school board member and members of the local NAACP chapter and the public defender's office, with conspiracy to commit a felony and injury to a monument in excess of $1,000. Ooh, you can't have that. The June 10th protest in Portsmouth, a majority black city across the Elizabeth River from Norfolk, came in the wake of national demonstrations against racial injustice, calling for the removal of Confederate monuments and other divisive historic structures from public spaces. The death of George Floyd, a black man in police custody in Minneapolis in May, focused renewed attention on such symbols. That's a good summary of the situation, at least in terms of what led to the protest. At the Portsmouth protest, demonstrators managed to rip off the heads of some of the city's Confederate statues, while toppling another statue, which police said, and did, fell on and critically injured a demonstrator. That is bad news. When Green, who is black, that's kind of funny because green is color, and that's weird anyway. But yes, that's an important aspect of the story. The police chief is black. When she later announced the charges, she said Lucas and others, quote, conspired and organized to destroy the monument, as well as summon hundreds of people to join in felonious acts. According to the police version of events, in a probable cause summary, Lucas was with a group of people who were shaking cans of spray paint. Oh, look out for that. And she told police that they were going to vandalize the statues. Okay. And you can't stop them. They've got a right. Go ahead, which might not have been the wisest words in the world, but okay. But a dismissal motion filed by the Portsmouth Commonwealth's Attorney's Office said there was, quote, no proper evidence to support the charges that the plaintiff's actions rise to the level of felony destruction of property or conspiracy. Video from the scene and other digital evidence were also unreliable, according to the motion. In dismissing the charges on Monday, a judge also questioned why police went around local prosecutors to bring the charges themselves, I'll add. It's not written here, but now I recall that was one of the weird aspects of things that, at least in local practice there, police could bring charges directly and didn't require the local prosecutors to make that decision and make that filing for them. City leaders had initially questioned Green's involvement in investigating the Confederate protests because of an unspecified conflict of interest. Local activists and clergy leaders called for her resignation or firing. I don't know what the conflict of interest that they imagined was, but actually I was just sort of pondering it and thinking it is possible, it's hard to understand why would a black woman police chief go along with what we're saying here is an unfounded scheme to frame up one of Virginia's top senior black legislators on something like this. And it is possible. Sometimes the conflict of interest is one of those where you're just trying it perhaps doesn't actually conflict you directly, but in an effort to look like you are avoiding conflict of interest, you draw the opposite conclusion. You know what I mean? Where you might say, I don't want to, this I don't feel is really conflicting me, but it could look like there's some sort of conflicting or conflict here. And maybe it's as simple as I'm worried that the white power base here in Portsmouth will think that because I'm a black woman, I'm not going to charge a senior black woman legislator. And so to avoid it looking like I'm favoring her because of that, I will go ahead and charge her, even if the evidence is flimsy or the charges are baseless or what. I just don't want to look like I'm favoring black women because I'm a black woman. I don't know whether that's what drove it, or maybe that's the conflict they're talking about. Maybe it's not. But sometimes that comes up, and people do things that they ought not to. Well, basically, that was the Comey problem, the Jim Comey problem from 2016. He knew that FBI and Justice Department guidelines said, I must absolutely avoid discussing whether or not there's an open investigation or reopening an investigation this close to an election because it can taint the results. But if I don't do it, then people will think I'm protecting Hillary Clinton. So in an abundance of caution, since she's totally going to win, everybody knows it, I will make this announcement, and then Republicans won't be able to point to me and say that I covered up for her, and yet she'll still win and be president, and I'll be I'll still remain in my job, I guess. I don't know how he would think that I would remain in Hillary Clinton's favor for having done this, but maybe if he thought she was going to win anyway, it would all be forgiven because, wink, wink, I only did it because I knew you were going to win and I didn't want these allegations hanging out there, and since it didn't make a difference, aren't I a smart guy? Well, that was a mistake. That didn't work out. Anyway, maybe it's something like that. In September, Green, who became police chief in 2019, hasn't been long, took an indefinite leave of absence. Rallies were also held in support of Green, by the way. On Monday morning, she held up a copy of her termination letter during a news conference. I believe I was wrongfully terminated for upholding the law and being retaliated against for sticking to my sworn oath that I swore to serve and protect my citizens, community, and keeping my officers safe, she said. Green said city leaders did not provide a reason for her firing other than that she was an at-will employee. Well, yeah, I guess that's all you have to say in Virginia. We'll see what the courts say about that. She added that she planned to sue the city, saying law enforcement should be able to protect the community and enforce the law without interference from political leaders. Yes and no. City spokeswoman Dana Woodson confirmed in an email that Green had been fired, but she declined to provide further comment, saying it was a confidential personnel matter, and that's kind of how you have to handle that thing. Okay, so we're up to speed. And I guess those of you wondering, wait, what's going to happen to the police chief in this crazy case? The answer is she'll get fired, and maybe she'll file a suit that reveals that something else was at the bottom of driving that policy or that plot to make those arrests after all. And it would be curious to know who it was driving that, if that is indeed the case. All right, let's see. Other things we should catch up on. We have more Trump lawyers dropping out of lawsuits in Pennsylvania. So that is of interest. And then perhaps after the break, we'll switch over to a different topic in anticipation of hearing from Joan in our last segment. Let's check in on what's going on with the lawyers in Pennsylvania, because that will give you an indication of how long this drama might play out. He's finding worse and worse lawyers every time now, of course, so it's always exciting to see other ones drop out of the case and watching who he replaces them with. More Trump lawyers drop out as lawsuit over Pennsylvania vote heads to court. Campaign hired Harrisburg area lawyer and conservative radio host Mark Scaringi, who I've never heard of, but he's never heard of me, so that's okay. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reports this one. It's an Associated Press article being reprinted in the Post-Gazette. That's okay. That's better. Written here by the AP's Mark Scolforo. Hope I got that right. A hearing on the Trump campaign's federal lawsuit seeking to prevent Pennsylvania officials from certifying the vote results, another certification blocking lawsuit, remains on track for Tuesday. That's today now. After a judge quickly denied the campaign's new lawyer's request for a delay. If you want to switch in midstream, that's your business. U.S. Middle District Judge Matthew Brann told lawyers for Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated, great name for a Trump campaign, and the counties and state elections officials that it sued the campaign that is, that they must show up and be prepared for argument and questioning at the Williamsport Federal Courthouse. The Trump campaign wants to prevent certification of results that give President-elect Joe Biden the state's 20 electoral votes, suing over election procedures that were not uniform across the state. Pennsylvania Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar has asked to have the lawsuit thrown out, calling its allegations in court filings, at best, garden variety irregularities. Brand scheduled the hearing to discuss the campaign's request for a temporary restraining order, as well as the defendant's request to have the case dismissed. After Pittsburgh lawyers dropped out of representing Trump's campaign on Friday, Philadelphia election lawyer Linda Kearns and 2 Texas lawyers also withdrew on Monday. Camp Hill lawyer and conservative radio host Mark Scaringi, a losing candidate in the 2012 Republican U.S. Senate primary, notified the judge he was stepping in, but did not get the delay he sought. The Associated Press has declared Biden the winner of the presidential contest, but Trump has refused to concede and is blocking Biden's efforts toward a smoother transition of power. With Georgia, the only uncalled state, Biden has collected at least 290 electoral votes, just enough that overturning Pennsylvania's result would not open an avenue for a second term for Trump. Biden's margin in the state is now nearly 70,000 votes. So I guess that means we're growing past the total that we were discussing yesterday. Although even by the end of the article we were reading yesterday, we're up to 90+ thousand votes across 3 states. But I guess that number is continuing to grow as Pennsylvania continues to count. The Trump legal challenge centers on how some counties let voters fix or cure mail-in ballots that lacked secrecy envelopes or had other problems. And this is an interesting argument too. If I read earlier, what I read earlier is correct. Let's get to it. The president's campaign lawsuit claims counties' inconsistent practices violated constitutional rights of due process and equal protection under the law and resulted in the unlawful dilution or debasement of properly cast votes. That second claim is a little more tenuous. Even the first claim is a little tenuous, but under Bush v. Gore, that's an actual thing that's out there that you can allege that if certain counties count ballots this way and other counties count ballots that way, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you can always get away with alleging that it is an equal protection violation. Why would, if this ballot, which was disqualified in this county, were instead cast in that county of the same state, well, it would have been counted under their criteria. And so why is this person's vote not equally protected across all counties in the state? Well, let's see. Democratic-heavy counties, the lawsuit alleges, and get this is the fun part, notified workers about the lack of secrecy envelopes or other problems in time for some to fix them. I said workers, but I meant voters. I think I said workers. The workers notified voters about the lack of secrecy envelopes or other problems in time for some to fix them. Right? There was a problem with the way their ballot was mailed in. They mailed it in early enough. The workers said, if you, right now your ballot won't count, but if you do this, this, and this, you can, under the law, cure that ballot, and we will count it if you get here in time. Now, that's all well and good, and it's all legal for them to do this, but the claim is that in certain Republican counties, they did not provide notice and a cure process, which disenfranchised people, they claim. And it did. But, and here's, again, their claim is that in those Republican counties, they, quote, followed the law. Not like those Democratic counties that gave people the opportunity to fix things. It's not clear to me, I don't know the Pennsylvania election law offhand well enough, whether or not the statute as written does or doesn't give people ordinarily the opportunity, if the workers catch it in time and notify you, the opportunity to fix your ballot, or whether this was another one of those things that the elections apparatus said they had been delegated the authority to do at some point by the legislature, and therefore, yes, if you find that there's a ballot that needs fixing and you have the time, you can actually contact the voter and have them fix it, even though there's no statute that says that. There may be a statute that says that, and these guys are lying? I don't know. But the more interesting part of the story was, in Democratic parts of the state where they want people to vote, if they found mistakes, they contacted the voters if they had time and told them they could fix them. Republicans don't want anybody to vote, so they didn't bother contacting anybody. And now here this suit says, well, what this means is that there was unfair bias in favor of counties run by people who like people voting. And the counties where they don't want people voting, they didn't let people vote. So therefore, that's not equal protection. But of course, it was you that had the opportunity to tell people that their ballots had been screwed up, and you chose not to. You can't just choose to go in the opposite direction and say, therefore, opposite directions were taken, and therefore equal protection and due process were violated. We'll see what the judge thinks. Anyway, the lawsuit seeks to stop bookvar and elections boards in 7 Biden-majority counties that are co-defendants from counting absentee and mail-in ballots that the Republican president's campaign claims were, quote, improperly permitted to be cured. Bookvar's lawyers described Trump's claims as generalized grievances and speculative injuries that would not warrant throwing out the election results. They told Brand that other counties could have permitted their voters to fix problems with mail-in ballots, but chose not to. Election practices need not cater to the lowest common denominator, and plaintiffs' arguments would improperly penalize those counties that are enfranchising voters by helping them avoid ballot disqualification. They wrote, I think quite properly true. All right. There is no evidence, by the way, they finally tell you in this paragraph here, of widespread fraud in the 2020 election. In fact, elections officials from both parties have stated publicly that the election went well, and international observers confirmed that there were no serious irregularities. The issues Trump's campaign and its allies have pointed to are typical in every election. Problems with signatures, secrecy envelopes, postal marks on mail-in ballots, as well as the potential for a small number of ballots miscast or lost. With Biden leading Trump by wide margins in key battleground states, none of those issues really will have any impact on the election outcome. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Ed Roots Radio. We can wind this reading up and then move on to another subject that I think will set us up a little better for discussing things with Joan, unless, of course, she decides to go in a completely different direction, which is always fun and exciting as a possibility. But let's see, the end of the article is within sight here, and a good point is made at the end, so let's continue on. Let's see, there's no chance, of course, of changing the actual outcome of the election, but Trump's campaign has also launched legal challenges complaining that its poll watchers were unable to scrutinize the voting process. That won't come to much either. Many of those challenges have been tossed out by judges, some within hours of their filing. And again, none of the complaints show any evidence that the outcome of the election was impacted. And I think the latest news, and I think it's Pennsylvania, could be elsewhere. I think they had their lawsuits tossed out in the trial courts. They've appealed, and I think that the appeals courts have actually acted pretty quickly too, granting the motion for an emergency ruling in the case, and then moving directly to, okay, you are granted in your motion for the emergency ruling. My emergency ruling is your case was properly thrown out and your appeal is denied. So, okay, pretty much what we expected here. Now, this is the interesting point. In a court filing last week, a group represented by the ACLU of Pennsylvania argued that giving the Trump campaign what it is seeking would create its own constitutional problems, right? Remember that the Trump campaign here is saying, well, it causes equal protection and due process problems if County A processes its ballots differently than County B. And so therefore, they're saying the only cure here is to block the certification of Pennsylvania's vote and write it out of the Electoral College vote entirely, which it doesn't take a genius to recognize, but I'm glad they did recognize it, and they're doing it's, you know what, whatever. Good point being made here by the group represented, in part at least, by the ACLU of Pennsylvania, saying, well, Now, if you did that, if you did what the plaintiffs were asking for, that would mean not only that Pennsylvania doesn't participate in the Electoral College, but that Pennsylvania would send no representatives to the U.S. House in January, because you throw out all those election results, right? And as of December 1st, the Commonwealth, properly remembering that they're a Commonwealth there, would have only 25 state senators and 0 state representatives, they told Brand. So, good point. In other words, and actually they didn't even make the larger point that I thought that they could make is, well, wouldn't that cause equal protection problems for all of Pennsylvania as the rest of the 50 states got representation in the House of Representatives and Congress and Pennsylvania didn't? That's essentially what they're saying, but you can spell it straight out. You make the parallel a little clearer. I don't know. Maybe they did, and the AP was running out of space that they had allotted to the story. But if you're worried about one county treating its votes differently than the next county, well, what about a whole state treating its votes as invalid and saying, to hell with it, there's just going to be nobody in Congress from Pennsylvania from now on. Plus, no state House of Representatives, because they were all on that ballot too. Which also brings us to the other point of why it is that Republican senators like Mitch McConnell and others are convinced that there was fraud, or are convinced that it's wise for them to agree with the idiot president who wants them to say the same thing that he is saying, which is that there was fraud on the presidential part of the ballot, but everything was A-OK on the Senate and House parts of the ballot as well. And if they're invalid ballots because of signatures, then they're all gone. If your allegation is that somehow people were fraudulently, I don't know what, induced to vote a certain way for president, but a different way, or not prevailed upon at all in voting down ballot, I don't know how you would even begin to prove something like that because it's so stupid, but that's the allegation you would have to make in order to not throw out the results of the Senate and House races as well. And Republicans show apparently no interest in resolving that internal conflict. And judges aren't going to make them either because they're going to throw the cases out on different grounds, though a few of them will probably take a pot shot here and there on that issue. All right, let's see. Moving on to this next subject. Speaking of, if we consider the elections for the Congress to have been more or less settled, except for those few outstanding races that have not yet been called, then you can move on to the next phase of things. Now, the House Democrats, having retained the majority, but perhaps having suffered some losses, they need to settle internally the question of their leadership going forward. There's been a rash of calls, as there always are, following every election. That isn't a miraculous outcome for the majority party. You gotta think about, do we need new leadership? And we've grown used to the calls for the replacement of Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, or the rest of the admittedly aging leadership in the Democratic caucus. And I'm not opposed to those calls. I'm not opposed to actually making changes necessarily. But I tend to look at these things, if we want to be able to predict what's going to happen, you know how I predict these things, and it's cold and calculating and not very democratic, capital D, or progressive, whether or not you capitalize the P, to think of things this way. But it is an accurate description of the way things go, and there's a way to justify it as well. But you know that my quick and dirty prediction for how to guess who will win a leadership election, at least in the Democratic caucus, I think largely in the Republican conference as well, although they're weirdos. You know, they actually do a lot more ideological choice making in their leadership elections than Democrats do, but because their ideology is so disgusting, it's really not worth considering matching on this side necessarily. Although our ideology would be better and a better basis for making these choices. We tend to make them based on money, and the money tends to flow based on, at least more or less, on criteria that really do very often factor into at least some of the criteria by which you should be judging people's qualifications as leaders. It by itself, it doesn't do the trick, of course, and is subject to dirtying by if you examine the sources of the money that make the difference here. But again, you know my rule. It's generally speaking, which of the two or more contestants for a contested leadership post, wherever it may be, has given the most money to the most Democrats who were in trouble at some point and who were seeking to bolster their chances for election. And, the easiest way to do it if you only have a couple of minutes is, well, okay, how much money have the leadership PACs of the contestants dispersed, period? How much have you spent from out of your leadership PAC? If you don't have time to look at anything else. If you parse it a little bit and drill down, a better measure, of course, would be, well, make sure that we're talking about how much of that money that was dispersed actually went to candidates versus covering expenses for fundraisers or anything else for, either on behalf of the person whose leadership PAC it is or whatever. But how much money actually made it to candidates. And then if you have more time than that, make sure that they are candidates who actually won and will be there to cast votes in the caucus elections. That's really where you should start so that you get an accurate picture. But if you only have 5 minutes, you might not be able to get all the way down to the bottom level of it. But the bottom line is, how much money have these leadership candidates raised and dispersed to people who are in the House now and who will feel obligated in some way, if not, even if they don't finally cast their vote that way, but feel obligated in some way to help out the people who helped them out. And for how long have they been doing it? And I guess if you're looking at sort of lifetime total for the leadership PAC. So it can sometimes be over 10 or more electoral cycles. And I guess you got to wonder, does it make sense to think that somebody who was helped with a $2,000 contribution in 1998 still feel obligated to vote for this person for leadership? But by that time, of course, the nature of the relationship has changed. It may be that you first came on board with this person for their quest for leadership back then over that $2,000 help at a critical moment. And since then, you've developed a real relationship, even though there's not been any money flowing your direction. Now you're stable, you're an incumbent yourself. It's time for you to start thinking about helping other Democrats win their elections, not so much about collecting money from leadership PACs that helped you 10, 20 years ago. Anyway, Roll Call is out with their roundup of what's going on in the House Democratic leadership elections. And now we get to the important information. Who's running for what? Now that you know how to determine who is a smart bet for guessing will win some of these contests. It turns out that they will be doing virtual elections because of the continuing coronavirus pandemic threat, and they will determine the ideological, racial, and gender breakdown of Democratic leadership, even if those decisions aren't made necessarily entirely along those lines. Lindsay McPherson writes this up for Roll Call. House Democrats this week will elect, that's why you won't have much time and you got to resort to my quick and dirty estimate for who wins. This week will elect most of their leadership team for the 117th Congress, making choices in contested races that will determine the ideological, racial, and gender balance of caucus decision makers. And the fact that they make these selections so quickly tends to actually suppress the number of candidates that you get for some of these contested spots. But the potential candidates all know that and are doing their legwork well ahead of this, well during the election season. That's why they're giving out money at that time, and it makes an impact and it makes an impression. But yeah, for the rest of us, particularly among grassroots activists who think, not entirely without basis, but mostly without basis, that they can influence the outcome of these elections, it happens really fast. It happens to have the impact of dampening their influence, if any, in these elections as well. You really have to be working the electorate much earlier than now. And it also has the impact of not giving very many people time to check to hold a finger up to the wind and see whether they have the base that would make for a reasonable challenge to an incumbent in one of these jobs. And you don't know how many of the people you think you can count on are, in fact, going to return to the next Congress and be on your side. But these things happen pretty quickly, and they happen quickly for a reason. And that's not the only reason. The other reason is, of course, it's time to forge the plan going ahead and do the messaging that everybody thinks is so important, and rally the troops and let people know what they can expect in the months and years to come in the next Congress. There's no wasting time for this. The Democratic caucus will meet virtually Wednesday, tomorrow, and Thursday to vote for all leadership positions except Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee chair and freshman leadership representative. The first termers get together and elect their own leader. It's doesn't wield a tremendous amount of power, but it's a nice practice run for organizing for leadership elections later on. The DCCC election will occur the week of November 30th. The freshman class has yet to set a date for its election. This week's elections include 3 contested races. Assistant Speaker, which I forgot was even a position, and I guess that's the sort of thing that gets created in order to make room at the top for new leadership and release a little bit of pressure on the top leadership to move out of the way. You can elevate somebody to a new position that sounds impressive and lessen the pressure for you to get out of their way. Caucus vice chair and caucus leadership representatives, a position reserved for members who've served 5 terms or less. Again, a recent creation, very likely a creation, therefore, of the Pelosi regime, and strategic in 2 ways. Again, relieving pressure for them to step aside and make room, and also, recognizing the need for elevating new voices. She's done that in a number of ways, and it's equal parts. This is what our constituency wants. Fresh voices in leadership, and also self-preservation. If they don't get new leadership representation, they may band together and push us aside. So, let's see. Here are 5 things to watch, according to Roll Call. 1, the fact that it's a virtual election. As with many 2020 events, the COVID-19 pandemic prompted Democrats to hold their leadership elections virtually. If the voting application Democrats set up for the elections works well, it could be used in the future to replace paper ballots, which are time-consuming to count. I know everybody's going to groan about that one. There's not that many ballots. There's only 200 and something members of the House Democratic Caucus. I think he can handle that. But, of course, if it's virtual, you can't do it. Anyway, the encrypted application automatically downloaded on members' House-issued iPhones. How do you like that? Well, it sounds dangerous, don't you think? Anyway, it was designed in partnership with some of the nation's leading cryptologists. Democratic Caucus Chair Hakeem Jeffries said in a Dear Colleague letter on Friday, votes will be secured by end-to-end encryption, and a member's vote will remain secret to everyone except for the member themselves. The New York Democrat added, and of course, lots of people choose to tell the press who they voted for. They're perfectly happy being transparent about it, but maybe they're lying. But the secrecy remains available to them. Each candidate will have a team of member tellers to monitor the encrypted electronic transmission and tabulation of votes during every election. I don't know if we should necessarily be endorsing encrypted electronic votes, etc., but pandemic forces it on us this time. Very interesting for black box voters, voting, those with concerns about it. Anyway, I don't know what they would call themselves. Anyway, the caucus will convene at 9 a.m. on Wednesday over a video call to hear from candidates and to vote, starting with Democratic Caucus Chair, since Jeffries, who is unopposed for a second term, oversees the remaining elections. Good process there, right? You don't vote for Speaker first. You vote for Caucus Chair. I guess like the way the dean of the House has to swear in the Speaker of the House. But you want to start with that election rather than the top of the ticket, just for procedural reasons. Anyway, right. So he's unopposed, so I guess he'll win. So there's that. The remaining elections are typically held in ranking order, but they could be shuffled to accommodate Wednesday's hard stop at noon. I don't know why they have to stop at noon, but maybe they run out of Zoom time at that point. Remaining elections will be rolled to Thursday's session, which begins at 10 a.m. I guess they've got business and they got to convene the House at Wednesday at noon. Okay, every candidate can have supporters giving nominating speeches and making remarks to the caucus, but they'll be doing it all virtually. Jeffries and other leaders running uncontested, including the top three. And guess what? Here's your answer for how will the leadership be refreshed by the pressures. It won't be. Uncontested positions include Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, and Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, likely to be reelected by acclamation as a result. And that'll make a lot of people unhappy. But again, as well as Armando has put it in his arguments about it on Twitter, and as others have echoed, who do you have in mind? Who's your candidate? And how much support do you think that they can put together in a week, given that all of the campaigning has to be done virtually? And the fact that, of course, they retained the House. So, it's a little difficult, even if you lost seats. The malcontents can argue, my election should have been easier, but all the people who are actually complaining about how difficult their elections were blame people other than the three top leaders for those problems anyway. In fact, they blame the people who might be most likely to challenge some of those leaders along the way. So that's the dynamic that's really prevailing here. In races where a vote tally is ordered, i.e. they are contested, members will have 15 minutes to vote on the app. Results will be announced on the video call. The first contested race is for the number 4 position of assistant speaker. It's a two-way match between, are you ready to write this down so you can check? Go to opensecrets.org and you can look for their leadership packs and see who's going to win this thing and where you want to place your money. The first contested race, number 4 position, assistant speaker. It's a two-way match between Massachusetts Representative Catherine M. Clark, the current caucus vice chairwoman, and Rhode Island Representative David Cicilline. We never did I never did hammer out exactly how you pronounce it. Is it Cicilline or Cicilline? Who chairs the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, and I guess looking to move up here. California's Tony Cardenas was running, but dropped out to run for DCCC chair, which isn't voting until like the next week, right? Is that right? Cardenas? That's where the accent mark is. Okay. The number 6 position of vice chair is a two-way race between Pete Aguilar of California and Robin Kelly of Illinois. Deb Haaland of New Mexico withdrew from the race on Sunday. Oh, that's too bad. I would have liked to have seen that, but she probably took a look at the leading indicators and found the writing on the wall. She's fairly new, but who knows? I don't know about either of these other people, but we can find out. Again, their leadership packs will answer the question for you. Maybe we'll run through that exercise for some of them right here on the air before the segment runs out, but maybe not. There are 4 candidates running for the 4 DPCC co-chair slots. DPCC? That's what it says. Let's see. The caucus voted earlier this fall to turn the chair position that Cicilline holds into a 4th co-chair. So that's interesting. So their vote could occur by acclamation. The current 3 DPCC co-chairs, Michigan's Debbie Dingell, California's Ted Lieu, and Pennsylvania's Matt Cartwright, I say Cartwright? I'm going to yell that out, are running for a second term, and Colorado's Joe Neguse, goodness, I'm just not familiar with any of these newer folks, currently a freshman leadership representative, is seeking a first term leading the messaging arm. 3 candidates are running for caucus leadership representative, Michigan Representative Brenda Lawrence and freshman representatives Jason Crow of Colorado and Colin Allred of Texas Only members who have served 5 terms or less get to vote, much less stand for election for these things. So they've really done it's a very interesting and, again, very strategic job being done by the top leadership, opening up opportunities, despite the fact that, these caucus leadership positions don't come with much in the way of particular power. It's more like prestige and practice for gaining the advantages necessary, to become more powerful leaders later on. But again, it does relieve pressure against them. And just thinking about the number of spots we didn't even know existed, and the number of people who we didn't think of as holding leadership positions who in fact do and are seeking re-election to them, there are an awful lot of people who consider themselves to be part of the Democratic leadership. It's a pretty wide base. Next up, though, in terms of what the leadership elections can mean, diversity, which is, as they mention here, always a factor in leadership races, but it's most prevalent in the vice chair race, pitting a Latino against a black woman. The only Latino member currently in leadership is Assistant Speaker Ben Ray Lujan, who is headed to the Senate. That means Aguilar, if elected, would become the highest-ranking Latino in leadership. I've got wide support from the Hispanic caucus, Aguilar said. They're my home. That's where I identify and where I have lunch, as a matter of fact. How interesting. There are no black women on the elected leadership team. That's going to need some rectification. But California's Barbara Lee, who unsuccessfully ran against Jeffries for caucus chair in 2018, is co-chair of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, which is a speaker-appointed position. And that, by the way, not at all without power. I think we should point out, Steering and Policy Committee, generally speaking, I'm not positive that they do this thing in the House this way, but typically they will have a great amount of influence on who gets what committee assignment. So that's a real thing. But it's an appointed position. Why appoint Barbara Lee? Remember, of course, a lot of people pointed at Barbara Lee as a lot of progressives thought, well, she would be a better speaker, better choice for speaker than, say, Nancy Pelosi, well, at least last time around. But Barbara Lee pretty quickly put that to rest herself and said, not really something I want to do, because there's one, very little chance that I will have, that I'll be able to replace her. And two, if I join the team, I might actually get a position of some power, because Pelosi is pretty good at recognizing, yeah, we really do need to have a black woman in our leadership and in a serious leadership position. If we can't arrange it by election because of the way things currently stand and the people who have done a good job in their positions and have campaigned hard for them and deserve re-election to them, then maybe we do it with an appointed position. Maybe that doesn't feel the same way, but, we've got to have somebody worthy in this job, and we really do need some diversity. I can fix that. Or I reserve to myself the right to fix that anyway, and the caucus seems to agree. So, where were we here? Yes, Kelly, if elected, would be the first black woman in a top leadership post since Shirley Chisholm was elected caucus secretary in 1977. So a bit overdue here, and I've already forgotten along the way who we're talking about. I'm going to scroll back. Robin Kelly of Illinois, who is involved in a race for the number 6 position of vice chair. So it's been quite a while since a black woman was in the top leadership post. That position was later replaced. The caucus secretary position that Shirley Chisholm had was later replaced by the vice chair role. So a similar position. Ro Khanna's tweet pointing this out is embedded at this point in the article. A senior Democratic aide said the timing is ripe, with Senator Kamala Harris making history as the first black female vice president. I think it's only fair and right that that possibly translates into a Democratic leadership position, the aide said. The gender balance of the leadership team will rest on the outcome of the assistant speaker, caucus vice chair, and caucus leadership representative elections, where women are running against men. If Clark is elected as assistant speaker, She'll become the second highest ranking House Democratic woman ever, behind Pelosi. The leadership elections may also set records for LGBTQ representation. Cicilline, the first openly gay representative elected to leadership, would get a promotion if he wins assistant speaker. And if he and Sean Patrick Maloney, who's running for DCCC chair, both prevail, there would be a record 2 openly gay Democratic leaders. There are more factors in all of this. Of course, we're taking our break. Caucus endorsements, very important in all this. Very closely track money. Ideology, yes, it is a factor and can play into things. And losers landing spots, too. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. And yes, okay, well, we may have to pass a reminder note to Joan. I'm not certain what might be occupying her time, or it might just be one of those, I forgot it's Tuesday things. Once again, and who can blame her? The days are all running together in our quarantine. But it does give us a chance, one, to finish up a little bit more about this article, which is of some interest, and probably something that you would want to pay some attention to. And two, explain what the hell I was talking about when I went out during the break. It says here, the last section of the article here, pointing out loser landing spots. Or I guess you could say losers landing spots. Which is much the same thing. Yeah, what this means is, what they're talking about in all this is, well, if you lose the election, let's just read this section. We will skip the other things for a moment, just to clear this part. When Democrats face difficult leadership contests, Pelosi, who's nice and nurturing, often steps in and finds a way to keep allies around. At least her allies very often. Of course, if you run a bitter race, pitting yourself against Pelosi, she sometimes will not step in. But sometimes it makes strategic sense to step in anyway and salve those raw feelings, right? The pattern started when Democrats lost the majority in 2010. And Pelosi created an assistant leader position, which is the minority equivalent of what are they saying here? This is the minority equivalent of assistant speaker. I see. Assistant leader position. Right. Okay. So if you have an assistant, you're the speaker and you have an assistant speaker. And if you lose, normally what happens in the old days, right, you have a speaker and a majority leader and the whip. Those are the top three positions. And if you lose the majority, sometimes the person who was speaker will resign from leadership. But very often, the speaker simply becomes the minority leader, but then the majority leader is in a pinch because the majority leader can't become the minority leader because the speaker became the minority leader. And while there's still call for a minority whip, there's nothing to do. You don't have any place to put the majority leader, the former majority leader of the House, is like out of a job. Why does that person get pushed out? Why shouldn't the speaker get pushed out? And very often, in the distant past, that might happen. They might say, well, I'll resign and you remain as minority leader instead, Mr. Former Majority Leader. But anyway, the pattern started in 2010 when they lost the majority, and Pelosi, who had an assistant speaker, just made that assistant speaker into assistant minority leader. Anyway, so that was created in 2010 so that Clyburn could remain in the number 3 spot and avoid a battle against Hoyer for whip. You see, right? Clyburn was then the majority whip. Now he would be the minority whip if you just stayed in that job. But Hoyer, who was majority leader, can't be minority leader because Pelosi's doing it, and the two of them presumably would have to face off. And that's not a great idea for a number of reasons. A lot of hurt feelings. These are two very popular people in the caucus, and of course, it wouldn't do to say push the one black leader, elected leader in the top position out to make room for a second white person. You know, lots of tensions there. 2 years ago, Pelosi wanted to clear the path for Lujan to become assistant speaker after he helped Democrats win the majority as DCCC chairman. Cicilline agreed to drop out of that race after Pelosi created the DPCC chair position for him to oversee the co-chairs. After Bustos decided not to run again for DCCC chair, and they didn't bother introducing her earlier or maybe they did. I skipped some of the article, right? It's an odd thing to just throw in. She's just Bustos. But okay, Sherry Bustos decided not to run again for DCCC chair. Pelosi quickly appointed her as one of the steering and policy co-chairs in order to keep her in leadership. It's feasible that Pelosi may find spots for the losers in contested races, especially Clark or Cicilline. Representative Mark Pocan, who chairs the Progressive Caucus, has endorsed Clark, but said, I wish we could have them both in different positions. Asked if he thinks Pelosi might fulfill that wish, the Wisconsin Democrat said, you never know. Nancy always has creative ways of adding spots. A great thing to keep in mind as we contest these things. The section we skipped over was how ideology tends to affect the outcome of these races, and just generally speaking, it doesn't. It really doesn't. But there's more and more call for it to play a role, so perhaps in some of the lower leadership positions it could, but really, again, if you want to predict and you want to bet, let's say, on who's going to win these things, check the money. That almost always tells you the truth of who will win it, and ideology comes second. Anyway, Joan Mccarter is here. We should get right to it and say, hi, Joan. How are you doing?
Hi, Kagro.
That's the important
How are
news.
you?
She seems to be fine, so that's good. Unlike Chuck Grassley, who I just found out has coronavirus.
He's been exposed.
Ah, okay. Well, let's just call it.
That's the last I saw. Did we find out he has it?
I don't know. I thought I saw it, and I saw it in quick. He's quarantining after exposure. That's true. Right, and I think that's as far as it goes, but he's 150 years old, so there's some danger involved there. It is pointed out that they're voting on some judges today.
Yeah.
Okay, and a bad one? I mean, they're all bad, I guess.
To be honest, I haven't been able to keep track of all of them that are coming. Right. I know one in this mix is a 34-year-old who's never tried a case. Who, God, what was the horrible thing about her? I mean, there was worse, and I can't remember which. But I've been so busy.
I believe you. Yeah. Well, what have you been? Have you been busy with work or?
Yes.
Because all right, I'm just checking. I'm have personal issues.
The lawsuits.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us what you're working on.
Did you see the latest?
I don't know.
Just breaking right now as I was trying to write the story up. Rudy Giuliani is now joining the case of the federal suit in Pennsylvania to block certification of the election.
Okay. You know,
this is the one that had the 3 lawyers leave yesterday, and the talk show host lawyer joined the case.
We just read that.
We talked about that a little earlier, right?
Yeah. So now he's in. Now, all right. Why wasn't he in at the beginning?
Rudy is now joining. Rudy last appeared in court in 1992.
Okay. Well, it's been a while. But it's still more experienced than some of the people who are becoming federal judges this week, I guess.
True.
Though it was pointed out that with Grassley quarantining, that it looks like this nomination that they're working on today, Judy Shelton, looks like she's
Securities and Exchange Commission, isn't it?
Okay, I'm not certain. It doesn't ring a bell for me, but looks like without Grassley in the House, if Kamala Harris shows up, looks like they might the nomination may fail 48-49 based on who's available to vote today. So that would be interesting. It would be nicer if it was a judge.
Yes.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Securities and Exchange Commission, but at the Fed. And she's bad. That much I know.
Okay.
I haven't really explored why she's bad. but
Yeah,
the people I trust
probably a good
say
call.
she is. So
I'll believe it.
maybe they can block it.
Okay, well, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And then we hang on to see what happens to Chuck Grassley. And yeah, so Rudy Giuliani, what? He's joining this suit. I'm not sure why he wasn't on it at the
He's
beginning.
now in charge of all of the legal and PR efforts on behalf of Trump's, what's left of Trump's campaign and his lawsuits.
Awesome.
So what seems to be going on is that, well, Trump doesn't really understand reality. That's
True.
not new.
No.
He's somehow still thinks there's fraud, still thinks he can get this to the Supreme Court, but at the same time is sort of focusing on running again in 2024 and needing to keep his base excited.
Okay.
So that means putting Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, who is sort of the female version of Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, she's not real good.
In charge of the effort and making sure that they get on TV a lot.
All right. Well, I'm sure that could probably work out in terms of getting people on TV. Giuliani, is he going to join all the suits in all the states? I guess we have to wait and see. Is this just the most famous one?
4 of them have been dropped.
Yeah.
The plaintiffs in Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, it was voters provided by True the Vote. Yeah, that organization, that right-wing crazy voter fraud pronouncing group. They had lined up voters in all of those 4 states to say, yeah, I saw stuff.
Okay.
And all of those have now, yesterday in quick succession, they withdrew all of those cases.
Huh. All right. Good. And I guess where they remain.
Lost another one in Michigan on the basis of there not being any evidence.
Yes.
And now have mostly this thing of, I think there's 16 active cases still. And I don't know how many. You have 4 states, 5 states.
I see.
It's very complicated.
Well,
the number that's most important is 1 in 24. That's his win-loss record so far in the courts.
All right, so that stands in parallel to his usual record in court. That occurred to me when he was saying, "Oh, well, I'll see you in court." One of his tweets like a week ago, like, "Have you seen your court record, sir?" I mean, you're terrible at this. I've got a thread going back 2 years already. That I started for different purposes, but it ended up turning into just a collection of his courtroom losses because there's dozens and dozens and dozens.
Dozens. He's very, very bad at this.
Yeah.
And somehow, in a lot of cases, he just wears people down.
Yeah.
By going back and back and back and appealing and appealing and appealing and appealing. That doesn't work for winning the presidency.
No, it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
He's not making his case for the Supreme Court very well. I mean, I think in part of his mind, he still thinks that this federal case in Pennsylvania will throw out all 20 of those electoral votes, that the Supreme Court will uphold that, and that they'll overturn the election in Georgia because of this Dominion thing. That he truly believes in. He's apparently become obsessed by it.
Okay. Well.
So he's got that in one half of his pea brain, and the other half is devoted to the idea that he's going to come back in 2024 and he's got to keep all of his people with him.
Oh. Okay, well.
Which means we're not seeing a concession anytime soon.
No, that's all right. I mean.
That's all right, as long as the transition can actually start. I mean, this is getting kind of bad.
Yeah. Well, we figured he would sabotage everything, and
one thing that's good is Kamala Harris is on the Intelligence Committee, so at least she's seeing some of it.
Oh, okay. Right. So
or can get some of it.
Yeah. There is that. Right. The worry about his not getting PDBs, I guess, in preparation for for the transition, which is serious and problematic.
Oh, particularly if I saw one speculation yesterday that some advisors, national security advisors, are concerned that he's having this purge in national security and defense so that he can attack Iran.
Yeah, and Iran certainly is at least excited about that, about fanning the flames of that being a possibility. They seem very interested in making the world believe that Trump wants to attack them during his lame duck period, because it makes him look ridiculous, whether he does it or doesn't do it.
Right.
So,
right. And hopefully, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where the military is at. I don't know whether they would go along with that.
Well, George Papadopoulos says they're with him, so that means they're not. What does he know? He might be getting them coffee, but he doesn't know. Yeah, so there have been a couple of military leaders who have, tried their best under the strictures that they have to work under to say, no, we're regular, people. We know, like, that we have a duty to the Constitution and not to one guy. But, it's very difficult for them to be forceful about those things and remain within boundaries. And, of course, there are other people in the military, too. But I wonder whether they still think that would work out, given that they're finding out, hey, all the military ballots that we were counting on being pro-Trump are for Biden, which they think is evidence of fraud, of course. But
yes. Well, I saw all these military ballots come in and they voted for Biden.
That can't be right.
That was one of the things that in Pennsylvania they took to court and were laughed at for.
Okay. So Giuliani will be with us for a little while longer. That's good in terms of entertainment value.
Yes. Did you see the Lego set somebody created? It's not a real thing that you can buy, unfortunately, but it's the Four Seasons landscaping building with all the little figures with the Giuliani, and then he had all sorts of crazy monster things.
That's a good idea. I would buy one.
I really want one of those. I wish they would make them for real. Wow. That would be the best souvenir out of this election.
That really was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, and I'll never stop thinking about that.
So there's a hearing this afternoon that could be really fun.
Yeah?
Yeah. Because Rudy will show up.
Oh! I thought you meant a congressional hearing. No, he wouldn't be. Okay, but so he's doing court today. Maybe.
He's doing court today. Yeah, the radio talk show host, who I don't know if you got this part in, back on November 7th on his radio show said, this case is a loser. This is not going to do it for Trump.
Well,
So he's got that lawyer, and he's got Rudy. That lawyer, the radio show host, Mark something.
Yeah. I forget.
Tried to get the hearing delayed yesterday, saying, I just took this on this hour. Can I please have a delay? And the judge said no.
I just took it, and it's a loser. So
and it's a loser.
That's really something. I guess his radio show wasn't going that well either because he needs the payday. But he's working for Trump. Oh, my God. Nobody told him. Well, that's on you, man. You're not going to get paid. So I hope I hope he goes bankrupt. What am I doing? I'm not being a nice guy about this.
I wish nothing good for any of them.
Sure. All right. That's ridiculous to worry about that. All right. So somebody has to show up in court today. Either the guy who said the case is a loser or Rudy Giuliani. So it's not looking good. Or both. Yeah, which would be worse, I suppose. All right. It'll be interesting to see whether he...
Watch Twitter for this. This is likely to be a very fun hearing.
Should be. Yeah. He might even maybe he'll let his gal Friday, Christiane Allen, do the argument.
Oh, boy.
That would be fun. Could you be admitted pro se? And all right. Well, anyway, pro hoc vice, I guess. I got my pros mixed up. Pro se, she should be admitted to represent herself as a criminal defendant later. And then she can act pro se. Okay. Anyway, let's see. Man.
Yeah, so that's the legal front.
Yeah, that's fun. So that's the next thing happening.
It is very funny, and it is very amusing, but it's also kind of scary that he's got this all going on in his head and that he's not going to go away. We're not going to have Trump as president, but Trump is not going to go away, and his deplorables aren't going to go away.
No, that's for sure. And even if it turns out that he's in no shape to run for re-election, I suppose he could always claim he's handing it off to one of his kids. And although it'd be interesting to see them kill one another. I don't think one of his kids
would be able to rile people up in the same way.
Yeah, probably not. They're trying. I mean, Don's trying to learn that skill, but
he's trying, but I don't know that he has it.
No, I think you're right about that, which is fine by me. But
yes,
but we should tell each of them privately that the other ones have that skill.
Yes,
and that the only way to prevent
well, I'm
it is
sure we've already got knives out
down the stairs.
Vodka and Don.
Yeah. Well, all right. Now, how old will Trump be next? He's like 74 now?
Yeah.
So 78, which is what Biden is now. It's not impossible, but he's not healthy.
Not impossible, but the comorbidities for Trump are significant.
Right. And, of course, if you're, if you've been tracking like what you think is his mental decline over the years, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to get in 4 years. It'll be interesting to watch and see whether it's just, what if he is? He's there, he's alive, he runs, and he's just verbally just a mess. And it's not like it takes that much to entertain his crowds, but what if he can't hold them at a rally?
Kanye can create a hologram of him.
I had not considered that. That is a possibility. Technology.
We could have hologram Trump having rallies.
Well, then he could be in any shape he wants, I guess. That's good news for him.
They could put him on Rambo's body.
Yeah, like on the flag that I see occasionally. So, yeah, all right, an exciting prospect.
I don't understand these people. I just do not understand. But a lot of them voted for him again.
Yes, and I'm sure they'll be excited to go to more rallies, although it'll be interesting to see whether as the Midwest and Plains states and Upper Midwest begin to confront the realities of the virus, it's a pretty bad atmosphere. I'm wondering whether some of these governors felt more free to do these things and impose restrictions because they figured, well, I won't be getting in the way of any Trump rallies. I won't have that problem now that the election is over. But what if he goes right back to it?
Yeah.
And runs into mask mandates.
Well, if there will be anybody left, good Lord.
Yeah. Well, some of those states, right. There weren't very many people to begin with, and they're now all in the hospital. It's 8% plus infections in...
Still denying that COVID exists.
Yeah.
Did you see the thread from the nurse in South Dakota?
Yeah. Definitely.
Intubating somebody who insisted that COVID was not real and who ended up dying.
Yeah. The tube's real, sir.
Tube's real.
Here it comes. That was astonishing. And I thought the wrap up of her discussion saying, people who should be spending their last moments unfortunately, having to do FaceTime to say goodbye to relatives, instead spending their times isolated, angry, and yelling at people, and then just expiring and never taking the chance to reconnect with family because they were too convinced that this wasn't happening and they were angry that people kept saying it was. I don't know.
Just unimaginable.
Seems like a waste of valuable moments at the end. But okay.
Yes.
I guess they are not a new story either. People have been losing people to, grandparents to Fox for years. It's just now it's happening very quickly because of a virus. So, sad.
So that's cheery. Also cheery is that there's no indication that Mitch McConnell sees any of this and thinks he needs to do something about it.
No. Does he he's not opposed to funding the government going forward for the next couple of weeks, is he?
Apparently not.
Okay,
now,
that's okay.
Okay, so this is another complicated picture. They've got now 13 working days. I think it's 13 counting today. 13 working days to fund the government, declare the official results of the election. And, those are really the only things because COVID doesn't have a deadline. So far, they're keeping them on separate tracks. coronavirus stimulus versus the budget. And now they are saying that rather than doing a continuing resolution, and I do not think this is going to happen, but they're saying instead of doing continuing resolution, they're going to do an omnibus and fund everything.
All right.
For the remainder of the fiscal year. I have a hard time seeing that happening.
Okay.
So I think we're going to have a continuing resolution.
There's too much to work out.
Well, we don't know for sure, and this is why I thought having a continuing resolution ending on December 11th was a really stupid idea.
Check.
Is whether Trump will sign him.
Right.
Either one.
Yes. Well, I guess, let's see, if they do December 11th and he doesn't, are we talking about like veto or just like he walks away and forgets to do things? Because we can get it passed that way. If he doesn't sign it, that's okay. It's just if you don't, if you do that too late.
Some Republicans in the House are saying veto. Now, whether they're saying that because they're trying to get their stuff in, whether they're doing it as a negotiating ploy or whether they really think he could veto this. Yeah. The problem is you don't know because it's Trump.
Right.
He could do anything.
That would be pretty dangerous. And of course, it could work it that way too, right? You veto it over something stupid, which he would absolutely do, and then they come back and fix it, and then you just walk away. And then if at a certain point you start to worry that if you pass it too late in December, well, one, there's a shutdown, and then two, you could actually affect a pocket veto at the end accidentally, or even if you meant it.
Yeah.
We're out of days. They'll probably, the Congress will stay in session until they renew themselves this time on the 4th, I think, because 3rd is a Sunday. But there's not a lot of days between December 11th and January 3rd. Certainly not a lot of days that they're going to stay and work.
And, with the way things are going now, with Lindsey Graham trying to tell the Secretary of State of Georgia to overthrow the election, to throw out valid ballots.
Right.
Would they actually override a Trump veto on keeping the government open?
Yeah, I don't know. I've not really considered anybody voting for overriding a Trump veto. Maybe they just want to do one before it's all over. To show that they did it.
I'd hope.
You'd think they would think it was fun.
I'd hope.
Or demonstrate our independence. Or maybe the Georgia senators want to do it to show that there's distance. Or maybe they don't. I don't know whether they want to hug him or not.
Because they can't have distance because Trump is still saying he's either won or he's going to run for re-election in 2024 and they have to keep their base happy.
Yeah.
So we just really don't know.
Well,
which is always what makes this my favorite time of the year.
Well, yeah, so many other, the timing factors playing into it, but in addition to just Trump's nuts, he could do anything. He might misunderstand, basic facts about when his term ends. He's lying about his term not ending, of course, but, I don't know what he knows about the actual calendar and how things work and whether or not he has to sign things. Well, I'll have to sit and wait, I guess, and see. And they have a couple, there's less than a month left before time runs out. Mm-hmm. And that's it.
And yes, 14 legislative days, 13 legislative days, but they can work on weekends, and they do. So, the negotiating doesn't really depend, and this is a problem too, on actually Congress being in and talking about it, since they don't do quaint things like hearings anymore to determine legislation, to figure it all out.
Yeah.
They can get it done. I don't know that they can get an omnibus done, but they can definitely get some agreement toward a CR. But where we're at on COVID relief, God only knows. Mitch McConnell only knows.
Right. I'm sure McConnell will, of course, prioritize keeping the government running, and it's hard not to. But, that's just a convenient excuse for him to ignore the fact that, in other words, we'll fund ourselves. The rest of you, well, you think you elected a president. One, we'll see what happens. Two, if so, let him fix it later.
Pretty much.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
And we'll fight him all the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else that you can do about it. People are desperate for it, and I mean, look, I don't know what to tell you. I guess it's time to let everybody, let your legislators know if any of them care, I guess. I mean, certainly if you're lucky enough to live in a... Yeah, if you've
got Republican senators, raise holy hell with them.
Yeah. Well,
every single day.
Sure. You can still stand outside their district offices and state offices and yell, stand a couple feet apart from other people, and don't yell in people's faces, but that's all that's left to do. All right. Well, thank you, Joan, for coming by and updating us with the good news that we will have Rudy Giuliani to kick around for a little while longer.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And we'll check in with you next Tuesday after he's been kicked a little bit. See how that went.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
From NedwardsRadio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, thanks. And with Joan Mccarter, too, so I hope you enjoyed it a little bit more than you usually do. It's a good Tuesday. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I see some very interesting stuff on tap, including more news about the ex-Green Beret charged with Russian espionage and expected to enter a guilty plea in his case on Wednesday.